Welcome to the Detailers Guild podcast. I'm Dean.
And I'm Dell.
Tonight we're going to talk about music.
There's been a bit of a resurgence in vinyl. Because back in the day, obviously records were a big deal, but then over time they were replaced by, well, 8-tracks tried to replace them, but that didn't work. But then you went to tapes, then you had CDs, and now you use DVDs to a point, but it was more like having like your videos and your music on one, but now it's just all pretty much digital, although you can still buy CDs, but they're not as popular as they used to be. Well, the thing is with vinyl is it's funny because vinyl pretty much went out mainstream, probably I would say early 90s. But it was always still there, but it was kind of a niche crowd that picked them up.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening is you had a lot of people who wanted to buy old vinyl. So you have places like here in town, you have like Dr. Disc, and there's other like old school, like vintage music places that sell records and tapes and whatnot. And there was a lot of collectors that were looking for that. So because they'd stopped making record players for the most part, except for DJs were still using them. Because that was the thing with DJs, vinyl never died. Like if you wanted to, you could actually buy. I mean, now it's not as hard to do, but like in the late 90s, early 2000s, when it hadn't come back yet, you could technically buy the latest album on vinyl, but you had a special order and it was harder to find. But DJs could get it. You could get it yourself if you wanted to, but you had to special order. It wasn't just sitting on the shelf. Well, nowadays, they've come back and they brought, now it's instead of just getting like Technotronics like or Pioneer or whatever else in terms of like your record players for DJs and that, they brought them back so regular people can buy them now too. But the funny thing is, the spin on it is you can buy record players now for maybe like $100, $150, whatever, but it'll play your albums. But the new school twist on it is they have it set up now where you can actually go in and you can convert your record playing to MP3. And you have the MP3 slot in there so you can put in a USB right into the record player, and you can convert the played records to MP3, and then you have a digital. So you're kind of incorporating the old with the new.
Yeah, I remember back when cassette first came out, it was a big deal to be able to record your record onto a cassette.
Oh, yeah.
That was a big deal because then you could take it in the car and take it around. A lot of the younger generation now, they don't understand how limited we were back in the day because, back in the 70s and the 80s, if it wasn't playing on the radio, you couldn't bring it with you. Like it was too difficult other than an 8-track. And an 8-track was not handy. It was a disaster. But yeah, it was, the 8-track was the first attempt at being able to bring portable music around, other than the radio. And that was a huge thing. Just when they came out with the cassette, that was a big deal, and then later on they came out with the CD player and that wasn't as good because, with that too, it wasn't as stable as a cassette because a cassette, you got a cassette in the player and you're driving and the road's a little rough, you can still hear the music, but with a CD, it would skip, kind of like a record, eh? So, yeah, it was different. But yeah, the kids today, they wouldn't remember that kind of stuff. The 2000s, that's when everything started going digital. You could just, download your MP3s on your, at the time, iPod, put your MP3s on there, and you could listen to it all day long.
No, I was just going to say that it's funny how certain things go off mainstream, but then they still stick around. Because I know for myself, when I started DJing in that, was 96. And when I started, I was helping out with different radio shows and whatnot, subbing in and that. And one of the things that I found interesting is the fact that they used 8-tracks. And they used what they used the 8-tracks for is they used it for commercials. And I found going to find out a lot of radio stations did this because one of the things with the 8-track that I'll tell you is because it's funny because a lot of times when you have certain technological advances that come out, you'll find that there'll be like a certain item that comes out, like let's just say an 8-track. You have an 8-track and you find that, okay, there's certain things that are good about that, but then there's certain things that are, that aren't so good. So then the next thing that comes out is sort of similar to the previous thing, but it addresses some of the issues from the first one. So, like from 8-track to cassette, for instance, you had a situation where, technically speaking, there were good things about the 8-track. I will say right now, one of the things that was cool about an 8-track as opposed to a regular tape, is that you could actually skip, like, just say you might only had 8 songs on a thing, 8 tracks. But the thing is, you could skip from one track to another and not necessarily have to fast forward through, which was one of the things that was actually neat about it. The problem is the 8 tracks compared to a regular cassette tape were huge. So to be able to carry them around or whatever, it wasn't really, if you were at home, it was fine. But to be portable in any way, not so much so. But
it wasn't convenient.
but the idea that you could skip from one track to another just like that came in handy with radio stations, and why it got used. Like, I'll tell you right now, those 8 tracks that we use, for instance, we didn't get rid of 8 tracks until, I would say, we got rid of our 8-track system and went completely digital in terms of our commercials. I would say probably about 5 years ago. So you're looking at 2016. It's not that long ago. The reason why they were so good is because the actual sound quality on 8 tracks was actually really good. Like, there was nothing wrong with the sound quality at all. And because you could skip from one to another really quickly, you could turn around and you could have, say, 4 commercials on an 8 track. And if you wanted to go to one, you just click the 4 button. Boom, it's there. Click 2, boom, it's there. And you could just go through without, whereas with a tape, you would have to actually cue it up. And then once it's done, you got to rewind it and hope that you get back to the exact spot that you wanted to get to. Whereas with the tape had, obviously it was compact. The sound was a bit better, but you couldn't get to that. Whereas with the 8-track, the sound was good. It was better than the vinyl, but not as good as the cassette per se. But you could skip tracks. Well, fast forward to the CD, and the CD is actually the best of both worlds because the CD is compact. You can travel with it. But the other thing is that you're able to skip from track to track without having to worry about rewinding. So you take the elements from the 8-track, which is the ability to go from track to track without having to rewind or cue. You take the sound quality aspect from the tape, and you combine it into something that is digital. And that was your first foray, going from analog sound to digital.
Yeah, I see exactly what you're saying. When they went to digital music, if you have a whole bunch of MP3s on an iPad or iPod or your iPhone, the one cool thing is you could pick a song and play it instantly. And that actually was a thing back in the 50s, the jukebox, because you used to have that, and they would have a whole bunch of 45s in it, and you would push a button and select it. And they had those for a while. You used to see them, even in the 60s and the 70s, they were still hanging around a little bit, like some of the restaurants and that. You'd go up and you'd push a button, and then it would select that record, and it would play it. Well, the digital system today is that cool. Like, you could never do that with a cassette tape. You can't just pick a song and it's there. That was the one downfall. And, well, CDs were a little bit better, but the CDs, if you had like a Discman, you had to go and click through and remember, okay, number 5 is this song or number 6 is that song, because it wasn't advanced enough that it actually displayed what it was playing when they first came out. Like later on it progressed, and you could actually pick what you were listening to, unless you were listening to it on a computer. The computer was a little bit more advanced. You put a CD in a computer and listen to it, you could actually see what track and select it. But yeah, when they first came out, they weren't that handy like the CD itself. It wasn't as cool. Like, once they digitized music and it was out there, you could just pick it as an MP3. It was a lot faster to queue up a song than it was almost like the 50s. There, you just push the button and bang, you could listen to your song right away. It was kind of a cool system.
Well, that's the thing though too, and it's actually kind of funny that you bring that up, because it reminds me of the fact that a lot of times people don't realize how old technology is. Because if you really think about it, CDs, as we were just talking about, that's digitalized music. MP3s, a lot of people, when people think of MP3s, they think of like late 90s, 2000s and on, in terms of file sharing and whatnot. But the reality is, CDs came out in the mid-80s. And if you really think about it, MP3s were around in the mid-80s. The thing is that in the mid-80s, that technology was not available to the public. The companies who were producing the CDs had these files digitized just as they have them now. The only difference is the technology for this wasn't made available to the public, whereas slowly it got, evolved to the point where now the public has access to it, just like taping technology. Those studios that were taping stuff a long time before it ever got to the point where the average Joe was able to use it. And, even taking that a step further, even the internet. I mean, the internet's been around since World War II. But the thing is, the internet was used with just the military. It wasn't until way later that it got to the point where the internet was used by regular civilians, And even then, it was never, even now, it's not as advanced as what they have. You know what I mean? Like, our internet is toggled by comparison to what the military has and government has access to. It all kind of goes along to the point that, like you say, and your jukebox analogy is a good point, that a lot of times when you think about it, yes, it may be a more archaic or more basic form of it, but if you look at the blueprint of a lot of the things that we have right now, yes, we may not have gotten to the point in the 50s where, okay, maybe the end game, let's just say, is right now, where you have a computer in front of you or a TV in front of you that has smart technology, and you can just go in there, pull down a list, and you can pick whatever song you want. Well, that idea, like you said, was around with jukeboxes in the 50s. The difference was you were still using records because that was the only thing that was available at the time. You were using 45s, and it wasn't something that you had in your house. Now, perhaps some rich person may have had a jukebox in their house because they're able to afford that. But to the average person, you wouldn't have had that. So it would be a novel thing, whereas now you can basically have your own jukebox at home. And, when you go on Spotify, how is Spotify any different? In theory, it's no different than going to, to an arcade or a pool hall or something like that has a jukebox, pressing a button and a song plays. The only difference is it's digitalized and it's in your house. Because a lot of places actually still have jukeboxes because they still exist in places. But the difference is now they're just digital. You know what I mean? It's the exact same idea, but you just go in and you pick a digital song, boom, it's done.
Yeah, I find that today, especially today, because things are moving so fast, that technology is actually like a handshake with the customer, because you have to make sure that the supportive technology is there before you come out with something revolutionary. Because, like, even the electric car, I mean, you come out with an electric car and you're going to get the odd guy that buys it, but if you don't have the electric pumps all the way up and down the 401, you're not going to sell that in mass quantities because the support technology is not there.
Yeah.
The same with the CD. Like, they first came out with the CD, they had to make sure that they actually had all these players available. It's supply and demand. They had to make sure that they had the technology to actually run this stuff and get it out there popular. It's tricky because you want to have the technology coming out at the same time that the supportive technology is available to mass amounts of people, or else it's going to fail, and that's happened a few times, like with the beta Max, if you remember that back in the day.
I was actually going to bring that up. Yeah, absolutely.
That was a perfect example because, it was a real cool technology and it was ahead of its time. But the problem is, it was so expensive to make that level of technology. It wasn't popular.
One thing to add to that, though.
Yep, go ahead.
I would say with that, and what I was gonna bring up is the fact that sometimes it has to do with, like you say, the service to be able to keep up with the technology. Because, like you said, if there's a situation where you have certain cars out there, but there's no place to service them if they break down or places to fuel them up or whatever, it's not going to work, at least not initially, or it'll just be a very few people that have them. The other factor when it comes to stuff like that is a lot of times, and actually the Betamax example is actually a perfect example of this, because ironically enough, I remember as a kid, with my grandparents, that we actually owned a Betamax. We owned a Beta player. We had a Betamax and we had a VHS.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I remember to this day that we only had a couple of videos for the Beta, but one of the videos that we had was the music video for Thriller.
Okay.
Michael Jackson Thriller. That was one of the ones that we had on that. And then we had Raiders of the Lost Ark, a couple other ones. Now, the thing with the Beta is actually Compared to VHS, technically speaking, it was actually a superior piece of technology. But what did it, though, is it was Sony, because
Yeah.
they owned the VHS. Like, they owned the rest of that technology. And it turned out that in the end, they won the bidding war for that, and then Betamax just got wiped out. Because, in fact, it wasn't even so much that Betamax was too expensive. I mean, that was a part of it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, VHS at the time was no cheaper. It really, like, if you actually go back and look at the prices of those machines at the time that they came, either one of them were expensive at the time that they first came out. The price kind of came down relatively quickly, but when they initially came out, they were both pretty, like, not anybody could just own a VCR back in the day.
No, they were
It
like
took a little, it
800
took,
bucks or something. I think when
yeah,
they first came out, they were expensive.
they were. It took, after a few years though, they dropped down, because I'm sure you probably, like, I remember back in the day, and I'm sure you remember this too, when VHS tapes, even to buy a movie was like 50, 60 bucks. Like, I remember I bought WrestleMania 6.
Yeah.
I remember, made a big deal of it. It was 1990. It was $80 for that tape. My grandmother bought it for me. It was $80. Now, you would never buy, like, the only way that you would see a movie for that much now is if it was like some sort of rare collector's edition, you know what I mean? Only 10 ever made movie. You know what I mean? Like, there would have to be something really special about it for it to be that much money. And even then, it wouldn't be that much. But that's the thing. And it was the same thing with DVDs, the high density disc and Blu-ray. And Sony was Blu-ray. And I forget who put out the high density. But what ended up
happening... You remember the laser disc that came out before that?
Yep.
It was the size of a record?
Yep.
They were
I remember Bandito Video right by me used to have them.
Yeah.
And they would shatter if you dropped them. That was the other thing about them. But Sony ended up winning out that war. So then as a result, they ended up putting out DVDs and high density discs. You never heard from them again, you know? And sometimes that's just how it goes, where you'll see two technologies out and then seemingly one will disappear, and you'll think in your head, it must have been just because, well, you know, DVDs just had to have been better. And in some cases, that is the case. It just works out that one just turns out to be more popular than the other, and the other one just kind of fades out. But then there's also cases like with that where it comes down to there's two comparable technologies out there, but it's a matter of, okay, you know what? Sony comes up with this idea. We'll say Mitsubishi or whoever comes out with high density disc. And LG is the one, just say, for example, who's going to be the one to produce them. So they go into a bidding war between who's going to get the rights, and then they ultimately pick Sony over Mitsubishi because maybe Sony gives them a better pitch. So then all of a sudden, whoop, HDD, high density is gone. Except you may see it for a little while, but it never catches them because then the Blu-rays are mass produced and the HDDs aren't. They're out there because they're still like, oh, we'll put them out. But because Sony's got the higher backing behind them and they're able to mass produce them, they're able to sell them at a lower price, which goes right down to you're talking about Betamax. Because Sony won that war, they were able to sell VCRs and VHS tapes at a cheaper rate than the Beta. So then all of a sudden Beta died. Because if you see a VHS tape that's going to cost you, say, $30, which is still expensive for a movie by not today's standards, but still, and then you see a Betamax that's $50, which one are you going to buy? Like, you know what I mean? Like, right there, even if the Betamax is superior, most people, unless they got a lot of money, aren't thinking about this. I just want to watch a movie. So goodbye Betamax, Even though the Betamax, funny thing is, it was a smaller cassette.
Yeah. Well, like today, you got a similar thing going on with Netflix, Disney, Prime, because they're like when Netflix first came out, nobody really paid attention to it because Disney and Sony and everybody would say, oh yeah, you know what, we'll rent their stuff out to Netflix and make extra money off of that. And then when they realized how massive Netflix was getting, then they saw the opportunity there for themselves to make money. Mm-hmm. So then they started their own, internet service because they realize it's catching on. And now they're competing back and forth now.
The competition is a good thing.
Yeah, but it'll be interesting to see what happens 5 years from now if they all survive, because it's tough. I mean, when you've got Disney is so massive, Netflix is big, but I think, either Prime's going to get squeezed out, or Disney might conquer all and wipe them both out. It depends on what happens down the road, because internet TV is definitely taking over, because compared to cable and satellite, it's ridiculous. They want, 90 or $100 a month for cable or satellite TV, which is ridiculous.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, you can get so much more. You're paying, I think the most you pay now is like $20 a month for internet, television, right? And that's if you get like the full enchilada with all your shows and stuff. But yeah, it's getting ridiculous. Like, they went and they priced themselves right out of the market, and I think that's what happened too when they first came out with like Napster.
Yep.
When that first came out, and people would download stuff for free. Well, Sony and the other record companies are out there at the time. Instead of thinking like maybe we should get into this, area and start putting our music out there at a reasonable price, they're so greedy. They wanted to get their $20-$30 an album. So they burned for a long time, because by the time they ended up taking Napster to court and shutting them down, it took so much time. They lost all that revenue. And they could have been putting out songs for, if they had to put songs out back in the day at $1 a piece, and it was virus free, and it was a clean cut of a song, they would have wiped Napster right off the planet. Like, people wouldn't even have bothered with it. Like, realistically, like with Napster, even though it was free, you could get viruses on your computer, or you're getting a crappy version of the song because you're downloading it off of somebody else's machine, right? But if you got to, and that's the thing, like, sometimes it's a greed issue too. Like, if they hadn't done that years ago, come out and charge $1 a song instead of $20 an album, where you get 3 songs that are good and the rest of the album is crap. That's the thing that killed the music industry, as far as I'm concerned. It wasn't the artists that destroyed it. I think it was their capital greed that destroyed the music industry as a whole, like for record sales. Because now a lot of these guys are putting their music out for free on the internet, and you can download, if you want to download more of their music, and go to their site and download it for $1 a piece, and they don't even bother with the record companies, a lot of these smaller guys, and they're still making money.
No, absolutely. Now, the one thing that I would say with that, though, is that I agree with you that if they lowered the price, it would make a big difference, because the thing is, a lot of people seem to think that what it came down to is people just wanted free stuff. And yeah, there's a certain percentage of people that's what they want. But then, as they always say, you get what you pay for. And you can download music for free, and that's fine. But then it's hit or miss whether the quality is going to be good. You could end up with good quality music every time. You could get something where it's at, 320, and it's going to sound good in that, and everything else, and that's fine. But the problem is, a lot of times you're not going to get that kind of quality. So like you said, if you have a system where if Sony came along and said, okay, you know what? And I always thought that this is the way that they were going to go. And I think some places have kind of adopted this to a point. But what I always thought would be kind of a cool idea is if you go into, say, a record store, we'll call it Sam the Record Man if they still existed. You go in there, and yes, there's a certain group of people who still like buying CDs, even now. And there's nothing wrong with that. So you still carry CDs. But then what you also do is maybe you have stations set up where maybe you have like 10, 15 of them in your store, depending on how big your store is. And at each station, it's just got a hard drive of just, say, terabytes worth of music, all licensed by Sony, BGI, all these other places that license music. And then you go in there and it's like, okay, you know what? $10 gets you, just say an album price is, say, for 10 tracks is $10. So you can go in, and maybe you have it, depending on who the artist is, maybe all of them are $1 a piece, or maybe you have some artists that are $1 for, say, let's say independent artists are $1. And, high profile main, big company record label artists are, say, $1.50, something like that, whatever. Yeah. You go in, and it's like you either have a $10 tier, say, for an independent label, and for a major label, it's like a $12 tier or whatever. But then you go in and you can pick, because the average album has 8 to 10 songs. So we'll cut it
Yeah.
down the middle and say it's 9. You get 9 songs for $10. Okay, you can go through, pick any 9 songs that you want to pick. So it could all be from the same album if you want it to be, or it could be you could make yourself a mixed list of 9 different songs from 9 different people.
Mhm.
And then you know what? Maybe that record store turns around and says, you know what? We sell flash drives too. We sell, say a 1 gig flash drive, or maybe it doesn't even have to be that big, because for a 1 gig hard drive or flash drive for say $5, you go in
Yeah.
and you buy the flash drive, and then you can bring it in every time you want to. You charge it up. Boop. I think if you did something like that, and then you'd still be allowed, like the artist would still make money, because every time you went to that station and downloaded those tracks, you're guaranteed to get a crystal clear quality track. But because you paid for it right away, a percentage of that dollar per song goes to goes to pay royalties, blah blah blah, whatever. Maybe the record store makes, I don't know, $2 per album, and then everything else gets divided up. Well, the thing is, if you have 1,000 people that come in and do that throughout the course of the day, or whatever, if you're a really big store, you've just made a
Yeah.
lot of money. You know what I mean? And in that way, people can still download, but at the same time, you're not charging a lot, but they're getting a quality product, because most people don't mind paying. It's not the idea that they mind paying. The problem is they don't feel that there's anything justifying paying $20 for a CD.
Well, yeah. Well, here's the thing too. Okay, when we grew up, we saw all the different stages. Okay, we bought songs on the record. Then we went and we bought it on the cassette. Then we bought it on the CD. Then we downloaded. By the time I downloaded, I paid for the same song 4 times.
Yeah, yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
So that's why, like, instead of being greedy, and that's the thing. Like when a lot of my friends and I, we had no money back then because we spent all our money on CDs and records, and because we like music. And if you wanted to have your own music, we didn't have the computer back then. We couldn't just download the stuff and listen to it for free, or just have YouTube running in the background and play whatever you want. You actually had to go and buy the stuff you want to hear it, or you're stuck listening to whatever you decide to play on the radio. So, it was a way of squeezing people, and they knew that people were addicted to music, and it is an addiction to a point. Like, people love to hear music, and if
hmm
you want to hear your own music, then you had to pay through the nose for it. And at $20 an album, or $30 for a double album or whatever, that was expensive. And like I said, like with a double album, if you got like a greatest hits album, you ended up getting a good record. Like for $30, at least half the songs there were really good quality. But if you bought a regular record, you get like 3 songs, and like I said, the rest of it's just filler. And
yeah,
it like, how do you justify that? Like, how do you justify paying $20 for 3 songs when now you can download it for $1 a piece? Like, they should have done that. Like, I think Sony and all these, and Casablanca Records and all these different record companies that were out there, they all missed the boat, because if they had to come out when Napster was doing that, if they had gone and started right away putting the music up there digitally in a clean format, selling it as $1 a piece, and having their own music store online, they would have made a killing.
oh yeah,
I definitely think it would have worked, but that's the thing, eh? Like, greed costs everybody money. It costs them money in the long run. Because they lost a ton of record sales between the late '90s and the 2000s till now. They lost a lot of money.
absolutely.
Because now people just listen to it for free on YouTube, and they really don't care. They don't want to, like, there's hardcore guys out there like you and I that like to have, their own little collection. But that was the thing, like, back when we first started, like, if your record got scratched, or the cassette player or cassette tape, it was in the garbage, and you might
Yeah,
only own it for like a year, and then it's ruined.
no,
So
absolutely.
I
And
noticed we had a few people listening to our podcast.
oh, it's awesome. That's
It's
the
like
other
some
thing too that I find
complicated.
funny, is that whether it's with cassettes or even like with VHS tapes,
Yeah.
I've always found it humorous how they tell you that you're not supposed to record anything,
Oh
but
yeah.
yet they sell the recorders in blank tapes. And what do they think that you're going to be doing with the blank tape? Obviously, you're going to record it. And to me, even if I wasn't, I mean, I never sold any music. But here's the thing: like you said, you could have the problem that you have, like, say, an album that you like, or a tape even, and
Yeah.
then the machine eats it and it's gone. So you know what? And I used to do this myself, with especially not with every album that I had, but ones that I knew that I really, really liked, I would turn around and when I got it, I get a blank tape and I'd copy it, but
Oh
not for
yeah.
someone else to have, but just so what I would end up doing is I would copy it and then I'd just put the thing back in the sleeve or whatever, and I'd play the tape. So then that
Yeah.
way, you know what I mean? The other, like the original wouldn't go back because I knew, because that was another disadvantage to tapes, was that once you played them a lot, you know, after a while, and it usually took a while depending on how much you played the tape, but eventually
Yeah.
it would wear out. Which, funny story, and I'm sure we've all experienced this, back in the day when rental places were still the big thing, like Blockbusters and even some of the mom and pop places.
Yeah.
If you got a movie back in the day, let's just say it had a rather spicy scene in it, you
Yeah.
always knew. You always knew where the favorite part of certain people for the, because you get to that spot in the movie where maybe I don't know, maybe Julia Roberts showed her chest or something like that, whatever.
Oh yeah. They rewind it a few times.
You notice that you knew that people rewound that sucker because then you
Yeah.
get to that spot and then all of a sudden you had like the snow in the screen because it was
Well,
kind
yeah,
of
not
wore
only
out.
that, yeah, you look at the tape too, and like when you're looking at the two reels of the tape, because they used to have glass windows on it. For anybody that doesn't know
Yeah.
VHS tape, I had the little glass window, and you'd see this fat part of the tape. So you knew that that's the good part of the movie because that's been rewound a few times. I see, you know, and sometimes you give it a spin right up to the fat part of the movie just to see, you know, see what's going on. You know, but yeah, yeah, I remember that when I was a kid. You know, the VHS tapes. That was hilarious.
Well, that and then when you'd go into like certain movie stores and they'd have like, okay, you'd have your action, suspense, or whatever, and then there was that room, the
Yeah.
infamous room, and you, the place by my old house. It was like kind of like a black curtain, and if you had, I remember I was probably about 11 years old. I'm like, what the heck is? So I just happened to peek back and I was like, oh boy, okay.
Yeah.
And that's where they kept all their naughty videos. But it's
Oh,
funny
yeah.
because everybody, you know, every kid, especially like when you were like your early teens and that, you're always interested in what was behind that curtain. And it's funny because as times advanced, it's one of
It's
those
like
things
behind
where,
the green door, eh?
yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where it's like we experienced arcades, we
Yeah.
experienced movie stores, stuff like that. Those are things now that in a lot of cases our kids will never experience that because they all disappeared before
Yeah.
they were really of age to actually be able to go there on their own anyway.
I think we'll have to edit out the black curtain for the YouTube podcast, but leave the rest of it in there. Oh man! But you know what I was going to suggest, though, is we should wrap this show up and just do a restart for the next show, and then you know I can split them up. Then I know where to edit it at.
Yeah,
What do you
that's
think?
good. Sounds good.
Okay. Anyways, Dell and I want to thank you guys for checking out the Detailers Guild podcast. Hope you enjoyed the show, and you can always find us on extremecarcleaning.com on our YouTube link that's there, okay? Or if you're interested, you can just YouTube the Detailers Guild, or you can YouTube Dean's Den, and my stuff is on there, or DJ Dell, and you'll find Dell on there as well. Or you can find Dell through Mixcloud, and Dell, I'll let you fill them in on it.
Yeah, so if you're a fan of old school R&B, jazz, funk, that kind of stuff, I have my programs. I list them on Mixcloud. You can just go to mixcloud.com/DJ DELL523 and you can check them out there. I post at least 2 shows every week, so you're going to want to check that out. I've got over 170 shows there right now, and it's growing fast.
So anyways, thanks for listening, guys. And tune in next time when Dell and I get together, and we'll have some more laughs. Okay?
All right,
Talk to
sounds
you
good,
later.
man.
All right. Bye.
Bye.